Imagine becoming the most powerful ruler in an entire civilization. You command enormous armies. You defeat rival kingdoms. You unite a divided land. You build monuments that survive for thousands of years. And millions of people obey your every command. Yet there is one enemy that even the most powerful emperor cannot conquer. Death. More than 2,000 years ago, one ruler became obsessed with defeating it. His name was Qin Shi Huang. He became the first emperor of a unified China. He transformed the political system. He built enormous projects. He created an underground army of thousands of soldiers. And according to ancient accounts, he spent the final years of his life desperately searching for a way to become immortal. This is the story of Qin Shi Huang, the emperor who feared death. The world he was born into. Qin Shi Huang was born around 259 BCE, during one of the most violent periods in ancient Chinese history. China was not yet a single empire. Instead, several powerful states fought constantly for territory and influence. This era became known as the Warring States period. Wars could last for years. Cities were attacked. Armies became increasingly organized. And rulers understood that weakness could mean destruction. Qin Shi Huang was born into the royal family of the state of Qin, one of the strongest states of the period. His childhood was surrounded by politics, warfare, and danger. When he became king of Qin, he was still very young. But as he grew older, his ambitions became enormous. He did not want to remain the ruler of one kingdom. He wanted to destroy the divisions that had existed for generations. He wanted to rule all of China. The conquest. Qin's armies began defeating the rival kingdoms one after another. The state of Han fell. Then Zhao. Then Wei. Then Chu. Then Yan. Finally, Qi was defeated. By 221 BCE, Qin had conquered the remaining rival kingdoms. The centuries of major political division had come to an end. The king of Qin had achieved something no previous ruler had accomplished. He had unified China. But he believed the traditional title of king was no longer powerful enough. He created a new title for himself. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. It was more than a new name. It represented a completely new political system. China was now an empire. And Qin Shi Huang intended to make sure it would never fall apart again. Building a new empire. Qin Shi Huang began reorganizing the territories he had conquered. Different regions had used different systems of measurement and currency. Writing traditions varied. Local political structures were different. The emperor wanted to standardize them. Weights and measurements were standardized. Currency was standardized. Writing was standardized. Roads were expanded. Transportation routes were improved. Government officials were appointed to administer different parts of the empire. The goal was simple. Make the entire empire easier to control from the center. Qin Shi Huang's government became extremely powerful. But this power came with an enormous human cost. Large numbers of workers were mobilized for construction projects. Farmers were required to provide labor. Taxes and military service placed heavy pressure on ordinary people. Punishments could be severe. The emperor believed that order required absolute authority. And opposition to his government could be dangerous. The emperor's fear. For someone who controlled so much of the world around him, Qin Shi Huang had a remarkable fear. He feared death. As the emperor became older, his desire to extend his life appears to have become increasingly important. Ancient sources describe expeditions searching for legendary lands and substances connected with immortality. Specialists and alchemists were consulted. Medicines were prepared. And some of these substances may have contained mercury. The irony is extraordinary. The emperor was searching for something that would allow him to live forever. But the substances he trusted may have damaged his health. The ruler who had defeated armies was now fighting an enemy he could not see. Time itself. The Terracotta Army. Qin Shi Huang understood that he might eventually die. So he prepared for another possibility. If he could not remain alive in this world, perhaps he could continue ruling in the next. An enormous burial complex was constructed near the emperor's mausoleum. And within this complex, workers created one of the most extraordinary archaeological discoveries in human history. The Terracotta Army. Thousands of clay figures were created. Soldiers, officers, archers, cavalry, horses, chariots. The army was positioned as if it were protecting the emperor. Many of the figures have different facial features, hairstyles, and equipment. They were not created simply as decoration. They represented an entire imperial military force. A supernatural army for the emperor's afterlife. And then they disappeared beneath the earth. For more than 2,000 years. The mysterious tomb. The Terracotta Army is only part of the enormous burial complex. The central tomb of Qin Shi Huang has never been fully excavated. And that creates one of history's greatest mysteries. What is inside? Ancient historical accounts describe an extraordinary underground world. They claim that rivers of mercury represented China's great waterways. They describe a miniature empire constructed around the emperor's burial chamber. Some of these stories may contain exaggerations. But modern scientific research has detected unusually high mercury concentrations around the burial mound. The discovery does not prove every ancient description, but it raises an intriguing possibility. Perhaps some parts of the ancient accounts were based on real observations or traditions. And perhaps the central tomb still contains objects that have remained untouched for more than 2,000 years. For now, we simply do not know. The emperor's final journey. Qin Shi Huang continued traveling through his empire. But his health was declining. In 210 BCE, while on one of these journeys, the emperor died. He was only in his early 50s. The man who had united China. The man who had commanded enormous armies. The man who had searched for immortality. Was finally defeated by death. But the story became even more dramatic after his death. The Qin Empire was not as stable as it appeared. Political struggles began. Rebellion spread. The government weakened. And only a few years later, the Qin dynasty collapsed. The empire created by Qin Shi Huang had survived only a short time. But something much larger had begun. The idea of a unified Chinese empire survived. Later dynasties would build on the foundations he created. The legacy. Qin Shi Huang remains one of the most controversial rulers in history. To some, he was a ruthless dictator responsible for enormous suffering. To others, he was a visionary who transformed a fragmented land into a unified state. Both images are part of his legacy. He was a conqueror, a reformer, a centralizer, and an authoritarian ruler. But perhaps his most fascinating characteristic was his relationship with death. He spent his life trying to control the world around him. He controlled armies. He controlled laws. He controlled officials. He controlled enormous construction projects. And finally, he tried to control the one thing no emperor could command. Death. The final irony. Qin Shi Huang wanted to live forever. He searched for magical medicines. He sent expeditions across distant lands. He surrounded himself with people who promised extraordinary solutions. But none of them worked. His body disappeared. His dynasty collapsed. His palace vanished. Yet his name survived. And beneath the soil of China, thousands of soldiers still stand. They have been waiting for more than 2,000 years. Silent. Motionless. Still facing forward. Still guarding the tomb of their emperor. Qin Shi Huang failed to achieve physical immortality. But he achieved something else. Historical immortality. Today we still know his name. We still study his empire. We still stand amazed by his Terracotta Army. And we still wonder what lies inside the tomb he built for eternity. Perhaps that is the greatest irony of his story. The emperor who feared being forgotten became one of the most unforgettable rulers in human history. He could not defeat death, but he made sure that history would never stop remembering him. Qin Shi Huang wanted to conquer eternity. He failed to live forever. But more than 2,000 years later, his story is still alive. This was the story of Qin Shi Huang, the emperor who feared death. You are watching History Uncovered. If you enjoy uncovering the mysteries, people, and civilizations that shaped our world, subscribe for more historical documentaries.